Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is KidLee. Now that we are a few weeks into Knights of the Fallen Empire, I thought it was time for me to make up a little video giving you all my thoughts, my feelings, and sort of a review of Update 4.0 Knights of the Fallen Empire. I'm going to be just very briefly going through each chapter, and then after that going through the main system changes. So to kick this off, the first thing I want to talk about is sort of the storytelling. I think what they've done for Knights of the Fallen Empire is some of the best storytelling that we've ever seen in this particular game. And one of the big things that I noticed, and I don't know if you guys noticed as well, is they finally did camera changes. Back starting in Mass Effect 1, 1, 2, 3, Dragon Age 1 and 2, they have something called the BioWare camera system, if you want to call it that. And in all those games, and then when this game was made, they used those same camera angles over and over and over. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with what they call the BioWare butt cam that they love to use all the time. But you'll notice in Knights of the Fallen Empire, they went with an all-new cinematic camera style that looks absolutely fantastic. So I'm really happy that they made that change. The other thing that I wanted to briefly mention is, did you notice all of the new facial animations that they put into the game for this expansion? You know, before, when you're going through all the class stories and all the generic or general stuff, you'll notice that everything is pretty straight. And then finally, with what they did here, you'll notice a lot of oohs and ahs, and the eyes opening, the mouths opening in different ways, and just the general better and new facial animations. It really helped improve the overall storytelling and helped improve what they did with the camera system. So 2 thumbs up to that. So let's go ahead and jump into the chapters. Like I said, I'm just going to sort of roll through the chapters here real quick. So the first one was Chapter 1, The Hunt, which was the full opening sequence. I personally thought they absolutely nailed what they did with that opening sequence. And for Chapter 1, there was actually more cutscenes than there was actual gameplay. So that was something that was definitely different that we've never really seen before. But they really needed to have a strong opening. If they didn't have a strong opening, then it's possible the whole thing would have fallen flat for them. But I think that Chapter 1, they absolutely nailed that entire opening sequence down to the big decision of, will you kneel at the end? For Chapter 2, it was A Dream of Empire, and so they went from that high-action, super exciting The Hunt in Chapter 1 to this dream sequence in Chapter 2. And I think they nailed it. They wanted to immediately swap to something different, and they really tried to slow things down, but they did it at the right pacing. So that entire sequence with you just talking with the Emperor, going through all that stuff, and this little dreamland. And I mentioned in the video that I did that for some reason, and I don't know why, but that whole dreamland just reminded me of something out of World of Warcraft. It just, the whole design, the color palette, and everything, it just reminded me from stuff from World of Warcraft. So I thought that was kind of weird. Then next up was Chapter 3, which we got into what I call a running or a chase sequence for all of Chapter 3. So it was very high pace, high energy, running around's cool, you get unfrozen, and you're meeting some of these newer characters for the first time, and you're basically trying to escape. So Chapter 3, again, gets really high marks. 1, 2, and 3 all get high marks for their own individual things. Then we hit Chapter 4, and you guys will have to let me know what you think about Chapter 4, but Chapter 4 is the Gravestone. It's where you go down and you get into the open world swamp. And again, it's like the first 3 chapters had a real nice pacing to them, and then you hit Chapter 4, and it's like hitting a wall. And for me, it was almost a little unsettling. It's just like, whoa, what's going on here? it goes from this running pace to this just stop. And it was really weird. And the whole open world sequences, and again in the later chapters, I think it was 5, 6, 7, definitely 7. It's like, in the first 3 chapters, and then chapter, I'm looking at my list here, probably chapter 8 and 9, it's like they had very scripted stuff going on, very linear pathing, great pacing, and then the open world chapters, which, if I'm remembering correctly, it'd be 4, 5, and 6, 4, 5, 6, 7, had completely different pacing than the other chapters. And I'm really curious as to why they decided to go 2 completely different ways with this. They made this a completely single-player deal, so why not just go ahead and stick with the linear pathing where you can control more of what is going on and you can keep a nice steady pace? But when they flip back and forth between the 2 different ways of doing it, it's kind of weird. So that's sort of my little beef with Chapter 4. And then the other thing that I really don't like about Chapter 4, well, I don't know if I should use the words don't really like, but it's not what I would prefer, is they just happen to find this gravestone, a massive ship that is buried out in the swamp that nobody knows about. That's the most powerful thing in the universe. Now, it's been well established in the storyline that the Zakulian technology was superior to anything in the Republic and the Empire. So you're telling me with this advanced technology, they can't find a piece of metal of this size in the swamp? I find that a little bit hard to believe. Just saying. So that's Chapter 4, the Gravestone. We'll move on to Chapter 5, which is From the Grave, where we're basically wrapping up Chapter 4, still in the swamp. We meet Senya for the first time. I thought that was a very good entrance. It's your character and Lana fighting in the swamp. It's like, oh, we're getting overwhelmed, and all of a sudden this new person shows up, and it's like, who are you? What is this? Kind of thing. But overall, I like her character. I didn't necessarily like her character early on, but in the later chapters, when you find out more, her character gets way, way more interesting. There's also a very interesting choice or potential choice in Chapter 5 where Lana is almost killed, and then the Emperor comes up and he's like, I can save her, blah, blah, blah. And I'm almost wondering, I'm pretty sure that Lana cannot die there no matter what you choose, but they do some very interesting plot turns and twists in this, and you come up to that decision, and it's kind of an eye-opening decision. It's like, oh, wait, what if I don't go with you? Is Lana gonna die? I don't want Lana to die. Please don't do this to me. But like I said, luckily she doesn't die. And then finally at the end of Chapter 5, you end up launching the ship, and you're out into space, which brings you to Chapter 6, which is Asylum. And a couple things that I'd point out in Asylum is it's really nice that they did indeed decide to add other companions or companions from other classes into the storyline. That's a very, very nice touch. And obviously T7 is sort of part of your deal throughout all the chapters, but we get to meet off the top of my head, is he a trooper companion? I think. I might be wrong on that, but I think he's a trooper companion. And then off of that, there's a pretty great scene with the Scions on how you're still kind of learning about Senya, and that she's like, come into this dark, alley, and we're going to meet my people. And they shock HK, and then when that happens, you're like, okay, you want to fight? We're going to fight, right? We're going to fight. And then it's like, oh, it's you guys. Okay. But then you go on to learn one of the big turns is that Senya is actually Arkin and Valen's mother. That was an awesome little turn of events. Very happy that they ended up putting that in. Next up was Chapter 7, Lady of Sorrows, where you go back to Zakul. And I actually thought, again, Chapter 7 along with Chapter 4, probably the weakest two chapters, because it's like you go back to Zakul and there's just a lot of running around, a lot of back and forth over the same area, and that's kind of not cool in my book. But again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier in chapter like 1, 2, and 3. Why not just stick with that linear path with the high action and all that? But I don't know why they decided to do that. But the one cool thing in chapter 7 is you're hearing about all this Lady of Sorrows stuff, and it turns out the Lady of Sorrows is Scorpio, and I thought that was a fantastic touch. And I actually did that with my agent, because Scorpio is a companion of the agent, and you actually do get different dialogue, you know, if you actually meet some of these companions on the actual class they were with versus everybody else. So the interesting piece in dialogue options there was pretty cool. And then finally we've got chapter 8, which is one of the stronger chapters. It's really hard. I mean, trying to compare, because like I said, 1, 2, 3 is good and 8 is really good. Those are by far the 4 best chapters. But it's like if you had to pick one on which is the best one, it's kind of hard to say. I mean, I would throw out 2, because of the 4, 2 is probably the weakest one. But the Hunt, the Outlander, and Taking Flight, between those 3, which is the best, I'd maybe throw out chapter 2, but then it becomes, you know, between 1 and 8, it's pretty tough. Again, almost have to go with 1 because it's such a good startup. But as far as chapter 8, Taking Flight, you get an awesome Star Wars style big 3-way fight. It's Arkin versus your character, Valen versus Senya, and then the Gravestone crew versus the Sky Troopers. And they even do the movie thing a little bit to where they're switching in between the 3 fights. And that is absolutely great storytelling, you know, great camera work, great animations across the board on all that stuff. Now, I have a major beef with something else that happens in Chapter 8, and this is probably my biggest beef with this whole thing. So what happens in Chapter 8? Your character is fighting Arkin near the end, and they use one of the biggest, like, scapegoat things in all of Star Wars. It's, oh, I'm going to take a lightsaber to the stomach or to the chest. And it's like, some people live, some people die. How do you determine who lives and dies? And if you actually go back and watch that cutscene, he actually holds that lightsaber in there for a good long while. I mean, it's a little bit longer than normal. Like back in episode 1, the whole Qui-Gon shot with Maul, that's well, actually, no, I take that back. I was going to say that was a pretty quick in and out, but he actually holds that in there pretty long as well, because he sticks him, and then it switches to Obi-Wan going, no, you know, that kind of thing, and then he pulls it out. So it's in there a good long while, and he dies. So again, in this game, you get stuck, and it's actually in there for a little bit, about as long as the Qui-Gons, if not maybe a pinch longer. So when you got a lightsaber in your stomach for that long, and it's just destroying your insides, how do you possibly live through that? I think that's a terrible... That whole sequence, I think it's just a terrible... Like, the one terrible piece of storytelling that they did in this. They could have found something better. Like, I've got 2 examples right here off the top of my head of what they could have done. One, they could have done the episode 2 Obi-Wan thing when he's fighting Count Dooku, and Dooku hits him in the arm, hits him in the leg, you know, basically just taking out a chunk in a chunk, and he goes down, he's like laying on the ground. You could have done that, and then Koth comes in, he sees the thing on the ceiling, he shoots the thing on the ceiling, the thing comes down, and Arkin goes flying off the balcony. That would have worked perfectly. Or, you know what, let's go one step further. Let's go option 2, and again, it's already been discussed about how the Zakulian technology is vastly superior. Let's go ahead and cut off an arm, or a hand. So all of our characters get their arm or their hand cut off. And so, you know, you're walking around, and again, Gravestone even, superior technology, right? So you get your arm cut off, You go back to the Gravestone, and they Luke Skywalker you, and you're good to go. Your character's appearance doesn't change. Both my options are better than what they went with, in my opinion. It's just, there's the lightsaber to the chest thing, or stomach, or whatever. There's just too many question marks around that. And I don't like what they did there. I don't. Not at all. So, moving on to Chapter 9, which is the Alliance. There wasn't really anything too major that happened here, because this was just basically their setup for two things. It was their setup for next year in Chapter 10, and it is their setup for the Alliance system, which is going to have you go out and recruit all the companions. There's one thing that I'm really questioning about what happened in Chapter 9, though, and the first time they did it, I thought it was great. But when they continued to do it is when I got worried. And what I'm talking about is the old school Kotor dialogue system. This is something that we've never seen before in this game. And why did they all of a sudden decide to do it? And as part of that, our characters are no longer speaking. Now, my theory on this is I am wondering if they ran out of time and or money, aka budget, for this project. They got to the end and they're like, we're out of time, we're out of money, whatever it is, we are not going to have the time, money, and resources to actually get all of our voice actors to record the lines that we need for all this other stuff. How are we going to fix this? Let's go old school Kotor on them. That's my theory. I mean, why else would they do it? It doesn't make any sense. And then the last thing I'll point out on Chapter 9 is before Knights of the Fallen Empire released, the devs said over and over and over and over and over, choice will really matter. And so far, we haven't really seen any of that. So it'd be interesting to see here next year if the stuff or the decisions you made in Chapters 1 through 9, if that does indeed carry over to 10, 11, 12, blah, 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 and it actually does affect the game. So, last couple things to sort of wrap this up. I'm just going to talk about general things for Update 4.0 that people wanted me to discuss. I'll briefly just mention what they did with the flashpoints, the updates they made to the flashpoints, you know, some solo, some tactical, and so on. I thought that all of those system changes were great. Now, so, you know, they some of them level to you. You get proper gear out of them, no matter what your level is. That's absolutely fantastic. What they did with raiding, not really a big fan of. I'll tell you this. When you have super old content in an MMO, and the developers say, I want to raise that content to a new level, I am totally fine with that. That is good. But when it comes to raids, if you're going to do that, again, fine, but you've got to give us something new as well. Why they didn't have the time, money, and resources to go ahead and put in one new raid along with the upgrades, I don't know. They needed to do that. They should have done that. Next topic is the level sync. It seems like this is actually a topic that has quieted down quite a bit. It was a big uproar when it was announced and then pre-launch, but now I'm not really hearing anything about it. I guess people seem to be okay with it. I think overall there's still some confusion on exactly why they decided to do it. In some respects, it doesn't make a lot of sense. I am not aware of any other MMO that actually does this, where it forces it upon you, so it's still kind of weird. I don't really have a opinion one way or the other on it. I'll just say that it's weird and it doesn't really make a lot of sense in some cases. The new companion system is awesome. I wish it would have been in the game at the start. Being able to swap what your companions are on the fly is a brilliant idea. There are some complaints right now that now the companions are too strong, and I definitely agree. I think they are strong. They could be toned back just a little bit. Not much, but just a little bit, because you don't want to flip-flop it. You know, everybody complains about it, and then BioWare makes a change, and then all of a sudden they're too weak. So you'd rather have them be too strong than too weak, I think. So anybody who's complaining about that, just keep that in mind. They might tone it back too far the other way, so got to be a little careful on that. And finally, the last thing I'll talk about is the PvP community. They're not just starving, they're drowning. They're deep in the water, they are drowning. They need some new PvP content. It has been forever. I think we're getting pretty close to 2 years of no new PvP content. I would have to go back in my videos to see exactly when I did my video on the new Hutball map, because that was the last thing. And that was spring of 2014, I believe. So once we get to spring of 2016, I mean, it's November 15th right now. It's going to be almost 2 years. That is crazy. But there you go, ladies and gentlemen. I think I've rambled on for nearly long enough. Just sort of my thoughts, feelings, and maybe a little bit of review on Update 4.0 Knights of the Fallen Empire. I definitely can't wait for the rest of the chapters to be released in early 2016. So if you have any comments or questions, please leave them below. Thank you all so much for watching. And with that being said, everybody keep playing and have fun.